Hello there my RPG lovers and welcome to another video. Kingdoms of Amalur Re-Reckoning brought us a new difficulty mode called Very Hard. Playing the game on Very Hard definitely feels a lot different than playing the original version of the game. Obviously, it's a lot more challenging experience as you might expect, and you could be struggling in fights, especially in early and the mid game. We're going to talk about some combat related stuff that you might find useful if you're struggling with this new difficulty. So let's get straight to it. No matter what weapon type you decide to use, there are some animations that can be cancelled by dodging or blocking. This is very important to realize because it's probably the main reason why you're getting hit in most fights. You try to dodge or block because you saw the enemy is going to hit you, but you're stuck in animation and nothing is happening. And you can find yourself being stun locked and dead in a matter of seconds. Regular attacks with most weapon types can be cancelled whenever you want by dodging or blocking / parrying. However, the very last attack in your combo can't be cancelled and it will leave you vulnerable to attacks. It can be really frustrating when you unleash your full combo on an NPC and you see his friend who is ready to blast you with a spell or something, but you can't dodge or block because you're stuck in animation. Each weapon type have different amount of hits in a combo, so for example the greatsword has 4 hits, the staff has 3, daggers have 6 and so on. You should always watch out before you decide to execute your full combo. It's not a good idea to do that in most situations when you're fighting multiple enemies. You want to have the full control of your character as much as possible, especially if you're playing a melee build. Another type of attack that can be cancelled is charged attack. Charged attacks usually have a couple of hits in the animation and you can't cancel them by dodging or blocking. So you should be careful when you're using those special attacks as well. Especially because Re-Reckoning increased the spawn rates of enemies, so in most fights you'll be fighting at least 3 or 4 NPCs. I personally like to use a couple of hits in a combo, then get ready to dodge or parry the incoming attack. Only in 1 vs 1 situations I try to execute the full combo, but even then you have to be careful. Especially when you're fighting larger enemies because they have a high resistance to stagger. But when you actually manage to stagger them, you should continue to hit with your full combo. That's the ideal situation for spamming the attack button. Now of course, all of this is highly situational, so just keep your eyes open. I think it's not so hard to get out of the way or use the parry button because most of the incoming attacks in this game are well animated. When it comes to your primary and secondary weapons, I recommend finding a good balance of damage and utility. And of course, you're not actually restricted here, you can use whatever you want and whenever you want, as long as you have the stats for it. But I like to combine weapons that will be useful in different situations. So, for example, I'm playing as a battle mage in this playthrough, my primary weapon is a greatsword and the secondary is a staff. These two weapon types can have a great synergy if you learn how to use them properly. Greatswords have a really good moveset, it's great for fighting a lot of enemies at once because of the wide arc of attack. The staff is great for grouping enemies together with a special attack or controlling enemies from the medium distance. If you have a lot of troubles in melee range with a greatsword, you can just safely start the fight from a distance with the staff and continue with your greatsword. The staff only has 3 attacks in a row, so it's pretty easy to execute the full combo. You can control a couple of enemies from a medium distance or interrupt their attacks if you manage to pull the full 3-hit combo. I'm not necessarily using the staff as the main damage output, I basically see it as a crowd controlling weapon for my build. I will probably do a separate video for this build, so stick around if you want to see that. Speaking about builds, you should pay close attention to your stat distribution. You can always reset your build if you don't like it by visiting a Fate Weaver in House of Ballads and spending some gold. But I recommend to open up your Destiny menu, pick a card that seems interesting to you and work towards it. You should probably avoid mixing all 3 skill trees if this is your first time playing the game, especially on very hard difficulty. I'm not saying these builds are bad, but you will need a lot of patience to get them going. Not to mention that it can be really confusing to invest points in all skill trees at once, so I definitely recommend to avoid that in your first playthrough. You will get 3 skill points each time you level up. Like I said before, I'm playing as a battle mage, so I'm combining might and sorcery skill trees. Whenever I level up, I invest 3 points in only one skill tree and I go back and forth with every new level. That's probably the best way to get new Destiny cards if you're mixing at least 2 skill trees. Now let's talk about weapon types and the stagger mechanic that I mentioned before. Heavy weapons like hammers and greatswords are designed to be good for AoE damage. Weapons like daggers, fey blades and bows are designed to be good for single target damage. You might think that greatswords and hammers have a higher chance to achieve the stagger effect on enemies with higher armor, but that's not true. Daggers have a really high chance to stagger enemies because of the high percentage of piercing damage, which will bypass enemies' armor. Piercing damage will basically break enemies' armor for a brief moment, and it gives you the opportunity to stun lock enemies. The piercing stat is not exclusive for faster weapons though, you can find it or craft it on hammers and greatswords. But the faster you hit, the more piercing damage you apply, so it's not that effective on heavier weapons. However, that doesn't mean that you can't stagger enemies with heavier weapons, the process is just a lot slower. But you can achieve the stagger effect if you manage to deal high amounts of normal damage in a short time frame. This is where bleeding effect comes into play. If you apply a bleeding effect on your target, you will do more physical damage from all sources. So it's a great effect to have on heavier weapons. The ideal situation for staggering big enemies is to combine piercing damage and bleeding effects on a fast weapon, or to use the appropriate magical element that the enemy is weak to. Speaking about magical elements, fire can cause panic, cold will slow down enemies, and lightning can stun. So to summarize weapon types, great swords and hammers are great for fighting a lot of enemies at once, but causing the stagger effect will be a lot slower. Daggers, fey blades and bows are great for single target damage and staggering enemies, but you won't have a lot of control on the battlefield. Staves have a great crowd control at a medium distance, and the elemental damage they apply will cause different effects. Chakrams are considered to be a mage weapon type, they have a decent AoE damage at a medium distance, but their damage output is not so great. However, they can apply different damage over time effects just like staves, so their overall damage is actually pretty decent. And the last but not least, we have Scepters. Scepter is the only weapon type which requires mana as resource. It has the least amount of attacks, less than any other weapon in the game. The damage is also not so great, but same as Chakrams, they have damage over time effects, which can be really useful. Their high range of attack can be a powerful tool as well. It's definitely not designed for a primary weapon, but it can be a great secondary weapon for some builds. I think that Kingdoms of Amalur developers did a great job when it comes to balancing all the weapons. Not a single weapon type in this game is useless, they have strengths and weaknesses, and it all depends on your playstyle. It's definitely one of the reasons why this combat system feels so good, but it never got a chance to truly shine in the original version of the game. And that would conclude our tips for the combat on the very hard difficulty. I really hope you learned something new from this video. If that's the case, pressing the thumbs up button would mean a lot. Tell me what kind of a build you're playing in Re-Reckoning in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more content and click on the bell icon so you don't miss any future uploads. Special thanks to my Patreons, and if you as well want to become one of them, all the links are in the description. Patreon is definitely the best place to directly support my work, and every contribution is highly appreciated. That would be all, and I'll see you in the next one.